welcome to the Bare Metal CRISC Prepcast. This series helps you prepare for the exam with focused explanations and practical context. Facilitating stakeholder selection of recommended risk responses is a critical part of the risk lifecycle, where analysis becomes action. It is in this phase that CRISC professionals shift from identifying and evaluating risks to guiding decision-makers through how to respond. Because risk decisions impact strategy, operations, and compliance, they cannot be made in isolation. Stakeholders from across the business must participate in the decision-making process to ensure that the selected response is not only technically sound, but also feasible, aligned with priorities, and properly resourced. Collaborative selection also increases the likelihood of successful implementation, as stakeholders are more likely to follow through when they have been involved in the discussion. On the exam, stakeholder engagement often makes the difference between effective risk management and scenarios where treatments are delayed, misunderstood, or poorly executed. The strongest answers reflect structured engagement and shared understanding. The key stakeholders in the risk response process vary depending on the nature of the risk, but several roles are consistently involved. Risk owners are the primary decision makers and are accountable for selecting the response and managing escalation. Control owners are responsible for implementing the selected option and monitoring its performance. Business unit leaders provide insight into how the proposed response may impact operations, staffing, or service delivery. Compliance and legal stakeholders ensure that responses align with regulatory obligations, contract terms, and industry requirements. IT and security teams provide technical feasibility analysis, including whether the proposed response is technically possible within the existing infrastructure. CRISC professionals do not make the risk decisions themselves. They serve as facilitators and advisors, guiding these stakeholders with structure, context, and best practice frameworks. On the exam, the right answer often depends on recognizing who has authority and responsibility and how CRISC professionals enable, not override, the decision. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other podcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Before stakeholders can choose an effective response, they must first understand the risk itself. CRISC professionals prepare for the decision conversation by presenting the risk in full context. This includes a summary of the threat, the vulnerability it may exploit, the asset at risk, and the estimated impact if the risk materializes. The risk must be described in language the business understands, not in purely technical or abstract terms. From there, stakeholders are presented with the primary risk response options: accept the risk, mitigate it through controls, transfer it through insurance or third parties, or avoid it by changing or halting the related activity. Each option must be presented with its residual risk estimate and how it aligns with the organization's defined tolerance. Where possible, cost-benefit analysis and resource implications should be outlined clearly. On the exam, a scenario in which stakeholders make a decision without fully understanding impact or constraints is often a clue that facilitation failed. The best answers reflect complete, well-prepared context sharing. Effective facilitation involves not just presenting data, but framing recommendations in a way that leads to good decisions. CRISC professionals must use clear, non-technical language and focus on the business value of each option. This means highlighting how each response option affects revenue protection, regulatory compliance, brand integrity, and service continuity. Presenting 2 or 3 well-analyzed options rather than an overwhelming list helps streamline the decision process. Supporting data, including impact projections and likelihood estimates, should be visualized through tools such as heat maps, scoring tables, or response matrices. These tools help stakeholders grasp complex issues quickly and make comparisons easier. On the exam, when facilitation is described in vague or overly technical terms, the correct answer often involves simplifying the message, grounding it in business relevance, and supporting it with visual aids. Selecting the right response requires applying structured decision-making criteria. CRISC professionals guide stakeholders in evaluating each option based on several key factors. These include whether the residual risk falls within the organization's defined appetite and tolerance, the cost and complexity of implementing the treatment, the timing of the response relative to the urgency of the risk, the presence of regulatory or contractual exposure that demands prompt action, and the strategic importance of the asset or process being protected. A response that is feasible but misaligned with business goals or compliance requirements is unlikely to succeed. On the exam, questions about most appropriate response often depend on these criteria. Answers that consider only cost or only risk level are incomplete. The best options reflect a balance between effectiveness, feasibility, urgency, and business alignment. A facilitating stakeholder agreement involves more than presenting data. It also requires navigating discussion dynamics, resolving concerns, and moving toward consensus. CRISC professionals guide the conversation toward shared understanding, using business impact analysis and residual risk projections to focus discussion. Where disagreements arise, they respond with data, scenario analysis, or comparisons to past incidents. It is also essential to document the decisions reached, whether through formal meeting notes, GRC platform entries, or risk treatment plans. Approval must be clearly secured, either through the risk owner's decision or escalation to governance or leadership as appropriate. The final decision, along with its rationale and owner, must be logged in the risk register and associated treatment documentation. On the exam, if a scenario presents confusion about why a response was chosen or who approved it, the answer likely involves missing documentation or unclear approval paths. The decision to treat a risk is only the beginning. CRISC professionals must ensure that there is follow-through and accountability. Once a response has been selected, treatment plan owners must be assigned, along with realistic timelines and implementation milestones. Budget and resource availability must be confirmed, and dependencies with other projects or initiatives identified. Criteria for monitoring and measuring success must be defined in advance. Governance teams should be able to track treatment status, review performance indicators, and trigger reassessment if needed. Dashboards and issue logs help maintain visibility, while GRC platforms can automate reminders and escalation workflows. On the exam, strong answers emphasize not just decision-making, but sustained execution, monitoring, and the ability to respond if the treatment fails or the risk changes. Communicating the decision across the organization ensures alignment and reduces confusion. CRISC professionals help summarize the key elements: the risk in question, the chosen response, the rationale behind the decision, and any implications for teams, systems, or policies. This summary must be shared with affected stakeholders, including IT teams who implement controls, business units affected by changes, and third parties where relevant. Policies and procedures may need to be updated to reflect the new control environment. Awareness campaigns or training sessions may be needed if the response requires changes in user behavior. Finally, the treatment decision must be embedded into monitoring dashboards, scorecards, and reporting cycles. On the exam, if a scenario describes implementation breakdown or lack of awareness, the issue may be insufficient communication. The best answers reflect a deliberate strategy to inform, align, and reinforce the response across the organization. Decisions made today may need to change tomorrow. CRISC professionals must ensure that each treatment plan includes clear triggers for reassessment. These may include changes in the risk level, such as new threat intelligence or incidents, strategic changes in the organization, such as mergers, product launches, or leadership shifts, or failures in the treatment, such as missed deadlines or control ineffectiveness. When such triggers occur, the stakeholder dialogue must be reopened in a structured, calm, and evidence-based way. The goal is not reactive panic, but measured reassessment based on governance discipline. CRISC professionals guide this process, ensuring that the organization's risk posture remains aligned with evolving conditions. On the exam, when a scenario describes a response that no longer fits the environment, the correct answer often involves reevaluating the risk and restarting the stakeholder facilitation cycle. In CRISC exam questions related to stakeholder facilitation, you may be asked what caused a misalignment in treatment, and the correct answer is often poor stakeholder engagement or a lack of facilitation. You may also be asked what's missing from the decision record, and the answer might be the impact analysis, the rationale for the chosen response, or the assignment of ownership. Other questions will focus on how to guide stakeholders effectively. Strong answers include presenting options clearly, tying them to business objectives, and framing decisions using risk appetite and feasibility data. When asked which risk response is most appropriate, you must weigh residual risk, cost, timing, complexity, and alignment with strategy. The best answers demonstrate structured facilitation, governance integration, and traceable documented accountability. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Bare Metal CRISC Prepcast. For more episodes, tools, and study support, visit us at baremetalcyber.com.